Times had a single sentence: capitalism, time for a reset. The rest of the paper went on to discuss the need for disruption to established economic models and the need for greater corporate accountability, responsibility, and purpose. The article and the ensuing series revolved around a single point, that the old model of maximizing profits and shareholder value were necessary but insufficient, and a new model was needed if we're to have an inhabitable planet. That new model is still emerging today. Over the last year, numerous reports on nature have highlighted the dire state of our planet's biodiversity. Last year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, one of this year's Nobel Peace Prize nominees, found that more than 1 million species are on track to go extinct by 2050. Major species such as lions and tigers and elephants, as well as lesser but equally important species, including many of our pollinators, are all set to disappear from our planet. Last month brought even more bad news. The Living Planet report found that we have lost more than 2/3 of wildlife populations in the last 50 years. Similarly, the Global Biodiversity Outlook of the Convention on Biological Diversity found that the world is not on track to meet a single one of the targets established 10 years ago in the Global Strategic Plan for Biodiversity. And just this week, a Kew Gardens report found that 40% of plants, including the plants we depend on for medicines and crop wild relatives, are headed toward extinction. We know that we're facing a global planetary emergency, one in which biodiversity loss, climate change, and inequality intersect in dangerous and unpredictable ways. But the new normal called for by the Financial Times has not yet emerged. The financial market still does not account for nature's value, nor for the risks posed by nature's loss. First, the financial value. The contributions of biodiversity to our world are immense. Nature provides about $125 trillion in benefits and services to humanity. That's 1.5 times the value of global GDP. Moreover, 3/4 of humanity depends on forests for our drinking water. 2/5 depend on forests for medicine and fuel, and 1/3 depend on nature directly for their jobs or livelihoods. Nature underpins not only our global economy, but the very lives, safety, and well-being of every human being on this planet. Now the financial risk. The World Economic Forum's annual risk report listed biodiversity loss as one of the top 3 global risks, along with climate action failure and extreme weather. These top 3 risks intersect to create new risks, including drought, crop failures, involuntary migration, and interstate conflict. Last year, the World Economic Forum published another report, one that didn't quite get as much publicity, called Nature Risk Rising: Why the Crisis Engulfing Nature Matters for Business and the Economy. This report found that $44 trillion of economic value generation, more than half the world's global GDP, is moderately or highly dependent on nature and its services, and that businesses that depend on nature's goods and services are most at risk. Despite the prophetic headlines of the Financial Times last year, the world has made little progress in changing how it does business. We lost an area of primary forest the size of Belgium, and this year we'll lose even more. Every day, in almost every indicator on biodiversity, we are headed in the wrong direction. But now, for perhaps the first time since the early 1990s, the world suddenly seems ready to put nature at the heart of business and finance. Here's why. First, at last month's first ever UN Biodiversity Summit, world leader after world leader stated their commitments to nature and biodiversity. Just days earlier at the Nature for Life Hub, more than 70 heads of state signed a 10-point pledge for nature, including bold commitments to halt and reverse nature loss. Second, we saw 530 leading companies committing themselves to reversing nature loss in the Business for Nature call to action. And a new coalition of groups, including the governments of the United Kingdom, France, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, and financial institutions such as AXA, Rabobank, and BNP Paribas, have just created a task force on nature disclosure, akin to the task force on climate disclosure. So what does this mean for the finance world? What is the imperative of this new normal? 5 things. First, financial institutions must commit to bold institutional goals and targets. 2020 has come and is nearly gone, and with it many unmet goals and targets on biodiversity. Now is the time to redouble commitments and to ensure that these commitments find their way to every single employee in your institution, that they become part of your institution's DNA. Second, it's time to clean up your portfolios. More specifically, it's time to defund deforestation. If you do not, and your investments are linked to companies that truck in deforestation-related commodities, the world will judge you complicit. And with the advent of increasingly sophisticated and high-resolution satellite imagery, along with public platforms to monitor deforestation in near real time, the days of hiding from deforestation are fast coming to an end. A Reuters article earlier this week found that many of the world's largest financial institutions, managing trillions of dollars in assets, are serving as the engine behind deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon, especially through their investments in companies that sell and distribute beef and soy. The report, authored by Global Canopy, found that major institutional investors, some of whom are even members of the Global Ethical Finance Initiative, do not have any deforestation-related policies in place to guide their portfolios. If you don't have a deforestation-related policy and you look deep in your portfolio, chances are you're exposed to reputational risk, and you'll see that risk play out sooner rather than later. Third, hold yourselves accountable for achieving your institutional goals. In 2014, on the eve of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, more than 60 companies, including a dozen financial institutions, signed up to 10 bold goals as part of the New York Declaration on Forests. The deadline for many of these goals was 2020, and not a single company has met them. The corporations and financial institutions that will thrive in the future will have robust metrics to measure progress toward their goals, and they will hold themselves accountable through transparent accounting and reporting. If not, the world will do it for them. Fourth, invest in nature. There are ample opportunities. The green bond market alone represents an $800 billion market, with $255 billion invested in green bonds last year alone. Other instruments include sustainability-linked loans, blended finance funds, and nature-based projects such as regenerative agriculture and sustainable forestry. Now is the time to invest in nature. Fifth, and finally, it's time to fill the missing middle in inclusive green finance. As you green your portfolio, get ready for a new ESG, one which more than ever will put the entire Sustainable Development Goals at the very center of business and finance. It will no longer be sufficient to undertake a box-checking exercise to identify a sprinkling of gender here and a sprinkling of education there. Instead, ethical investing must become far more infused with purpose, especially on improving the lives of the 2 billion people who live on less than $4 a day and depend on nature for their livelihoods and jobs. We must see a movement toward promoting green, circular economies. If we're truly to have an economic reset, we must crack the nut on how to finance green, nature-positive, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. Enterprises that are the very backbone of much of the world's developing country economies. It's clear from recent reports, global events, and the daily headlines that we're on the verge of a seismic shift in the world of finance. Behind all the noise and the din is a single sentiment. We must put nature at the heart of business and finance. My hope is that later this year there will be another single sentence on the front page of the Financial Times. Nature, time for a reset, and it won't be a moment too soon. Thank you.